Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. Jai Miranga, Miranga, Namo Namaha. Jai Guranga, Jai Nishingadev. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're going to look at Bhagavad-Gita text 6. Moving forward here in the Bhagavad-Gita series, we now have a microphone and a stand, and the microphone is up high, so hopefully the audio should be better here for you. Translation: Nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. The sons of Dhritarashtra, whom if we killed we should not care to live, are now standing before us on this battlefield. So Arjun here is saying, nor do we know which is better, conquering or being conquered. So this is kind of something that happens every day in our regular lives, or at least every day in mine, but I'm assuming in everyone else's, considering we all have similar minds that always constantly are assessing the material world and assessing sense gratification and assessing the outcomes of certain circumstances. The mind is always looking at things and trying to determine what the best outcome is for you, and also will try to reduce the negative effects as well. So how much sense gratification can I get from this? And how can I limit the negative effects to others, to my fame, to my name, to my body, to my health? And, certain people are able to even disregard the negatives, and even as the negative reactions are happening, say in drug addictions or different things, they will still convince themselves that the outcome of something is worth more to them than even the negative effects, or they're in such a tamagun or mode of ignorance that they themselves aren't even capable of recognizing that harm is being done to them. And when you're quite in the mode of ignorance and quite in tamagun, it's interesting because you're actually able to derive happiness from being in tamagun, from experiencing stress, and it actually becomes a form of bliss as well. Although to someone from the outside in a higher mode, they can see that that person's suffering. But oddly enough, people in the mode of goodness and people in the mode of ignorance both are quite blissful. You see a lot of these people, at least to themselves, you see a lot of these people that live on the streets and they're freezing cold. They don't have heat. They don't have proper clothing. They can't, live the way that we live. And you think, like, if I was put in that situation, it would be very difficult for me to survive even a few days or a week. Like, you put yourself in that situation and think, how are they, capable of living like that? And it's because the mode of ignorance kicks in such a way that it really allows them to experience suffering in a different way from other people, where it becomes less affecting to them and they're actually able to derive some form of happiness from it even. So, Arjun here is speaking from the position of the mind, where he is thinking, well, do I do this or do I do that? Every day in the material world, we have these considerations. Should I spend this money and build my business in this way? Should I build my business that way? Should we go here for a vacation? Should we go there for a vacation? What will the outcome of this be? What will the outcome of that be? If you really think about our everyday lives, every single word that we utter to someone, every utterance that the mind makes or that we make to ourselves, every affirmation and negative affirmation, every food that we eat, everything has a reaction. And the more knowledge that we get, the more that the mind is safely able to navigate these and really see what the outcomes of each situation could be and should be. if I do this, um, a lot of people will just do things forced through the mode of ignorance, forced through the mode of passion or goodness as well. But those forces are coming from the mind to derive some sense gratification, whether it's, positive in philanthropy or very negative in, destructive behaviors. But no matter what you're doing, the mind is pushing that sense gratification, pushing you to make decisions against your, best judgments when your intelligence kicks in and say, hey, this might not be a good thing for me. So we're always bewildered here. We're always committing mistakes. We're always prone to, having imperfect senses. And these things make our decision-making power very difficult when you're strictly on the mental platform and have a low spiritual intelligence or even a material intelligence. A lot of people get themselves into trouble simply because they're not even a bad person. It's just that their mind is very, very, difficult to manage. They have quite a lot of samskars that are in the lower modes, and those are constantly coming out through the heart, coming out as desires from the Atma, from your true self. And the mind grabs onto them quickly and says, okay, we can do like this, we can do like that, we can do this. And your intelligence is not sharp enough to catch this and say, hey, like we're on the wrong path here. This can happen if that's going to happen. This will be the outcome if you do this. Be very careful about doing that. So through reading these shastras here and chanting Hare Krishna, chanting your rounds every day, taking prasadam, associating with devotees, you sharpen your intelligence to a point where you can start to have conversations with your mind and start to wrestle these desires and sense gratification processes and keep them at bay somewhat through the power of intelligence and deductive reasoning and saying, hey, if we do this, then this is going to happen. And you can start to build up a little bit of armor towards the mind. In this particular case, we're just starting the Bhagavad-Gita here, and Arjuna is just very stricken with grief at the moment and very, sad, lamenting, crying, as we've discussed before. When you're in that position, generally your intelligence is not as sharp as it could be because your emotions, which are controlled by the mind, are running a little too freely, so the intelligence is not able to really root down. And the funny thing is here is he has Krishna right there to surrender to have all of the answers given to him. Now, in our particular case, we're asked to surrender to Krishna as well. That surrendering process really happens by understanding that you do not have power to control Maya, Mahamaya. The illusory energy is able to, at any time, control the jivas here, control all of the souls that live in all these material bodies. We don't have the power to overcome that. We can only have the power to turn our face towards Krishna, towards God, and ask for some shelter, some reprieve from the sense gratification, from the suffering, for more intelligence, and for more purity of heart and desire. And through showing that desire to God, he then will bestow his mercy upon you and help you to purify and help Maya to no longer attack you and help you to transcend the material nature. But other than, his mercy and the mercy of other devotees, it's very difficult. You can't just say, hey, I'm not going to sense gratify anymore. The mind is so tricky that every path that you take, good or bad, ends up leading to some difficulty in the material world, especially pride. If you do become quite successful, then your pride starts to come up. So all of these are blockades to pure devotional service. Arjun did not know whether he should fight and risk unnecessary violence, although fighting is the duty of the Kshatriya. So yeah, again, we're just discussing this issue with Arjun where he doesn't really know what he's meant to be doing at the moment. Prabhupada's using this word unnecessary violence, which is interesting because everything that's been discussed is that the Kshatriya, must fight in this situation and that is his particular duty. So it may not really be the best word here, unnecessary violence, but we are kind of playing the devil's advocate, and Prabhupada as well is speaking a lot in the purports as if he doesn't know the answers to a lot of things because it is the start of the Bhagavad-Gita. Or whether he should refrain and live by begging. So these are the two options here, especially if we'll get to this point here. If he did not conquer the enemy, begging would be his only means of subsistence. So if he doesn't win in the battle here against his family, they are very powerful and they'd already exiled the Pandavas once before. So they would not have palaces and money and land to live on. They would be living in exile and begging just as before. If he did not conquer the enemy, begging would be his only means of subsistence. Nor was there certainty of victory because either side might emerge victorious. I don't know if I necessarily agree with this statement. Again, Prabhupada's kind of playing, speaking from a vantage point of, well, I don't really know the answers to things here yet. But when you're talking about Arjun and Krishna has set up the entire circumstance of the Bhagavad Gita. The entire Mahabharata is all a pastime that's all been put together by Krishna. And it's not a circumstance that emerged simply out of coincidence. Neither did the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita was spoken for us in this particular circumstance to enlighten all of the living entities of this particular age. So none of this happened by chance. Nor was there certainty of victory. I mean, when you're speaking of Krishna, there might not be certainty of victory because although Krishna's on your side, it doesn't mean that you're going to be victorious. It means that whatever happens in that circumstance is going to happen because Krishna has sanctioned it. That doesn't mean that when you turn your face to Krishna and you become Krishna conscious or transcendental, and this is something that a lot of people come to religions looking for. Excuse me. They come to religions thinking and looking for to become more powerful, generally, to become better than other people. They think that transcendence means that I will have some immense amount of control over people, or I will feel like I am better and smarter and more spiritual than others. Usually we come with these types of ideas of becoming this amazing, powerful being, essentially. Now that does and can happen. However, the tricky point is that as the ego and the mind become more calm, you actually, so it's described that you become and feel lower than the straw in the street. Now we read these things and we think, oh, that's a nice kind of concept or idea. But it doesn't necessarily feel that good at the outset when you start to feel how dirty your actual heart is, how impure you are as a spiritual entity, how many poor samskaras you have and poor desires that you have, and so many things that you want to do that are antithesis, opposite to what you're trying to do spiritually. So as you come to your spiritual practice, it seems like a nice concept at the start to be this, powerful being, I'm a yogi, I'm this, I'm that, and you boast to everyone or whatever about, how smart you are now or all your enlightenments. But slowly, you start to see more of who you really are. And that is your first roadblock. And the first reason a lot of people will leave their spiritual practice is actually becoming a worse person before they become better. Secondly, as you become more and more pure, you actually start to see everyone on a transcendental platform, as everything is connected and part of Krishna. So everything starts to become part and parcel of Krishna as it is, and connected through his energies. So then there's nothing to envy except Krishna himself at that point. And then you start to realize, well, hey, like I'm not really ready to surrender to Krishna in this particular point in my life. And you realize how difficult that is. What this whole process is actually surrendering and placing yourself at the lotus feet of Krishna, placing yourself lower than the straw in the street to everyone else around you, feeling how small and insignificant you really are. So the more transcendental you come to a point where you're not able to even preach to people anymore because you feel more insignificant than them, because you have advanced not to a point of being puffed up and I'm better than you, but to the point of realizing, hey, I'm actually so small and insignificant. Who am I to say anything to you, actually? Um, when you start to have these realizations, it's very enlightening to see how Krishna uses that original idea of becoming better and, stronger and smarter than other people and more transcendental than other people, this egotistical perspective of religion, to snare you in. Or if you're highly intelligent and want a lot of knowledge or all these different things, or mystic siddhis. So he'll snare you in with these, but then as you progress, a lot of people don't make it past that. And that's why so many people leave spiritual practices that are difficult like this, is because the ego just does not allow them to get past that point of realizing how insignificant you really are and coming to that Majjhima Adhikari. So here, Arjuna doesn't have any issue with this because as it's described here later in the purport, let's keep reading here. Even if victory awaited them and their cause was justified, which it was not, still, if the sons of Dhritarashtra died in battle, it would be very difficult to live in their absence. Of course, even if you're transcendental, even if you're a Majjhima Adhikari, you have so much love for everyone. And, obviously being in battle as a Kshatriya, performing your duty and killing anyone, really, if you're fully transcendental, which they are here, in all honesty, you're not going to be having like emotions about this, because it does describe like the jiva can't be burnt, it can't be killed. All of these bodies are temporary. When you really look at everything in the material world, sadly enough, there's no importance to any of it aside from your actual actions and desires that come from the jiva. And when those aren't directed towards God, there's actually no importance whatsoever, because it's strictly material, and all you're doing is getting positive and negative benefits for it and being stuck in one body or another, in one planetary system or another, and hells and heavens, everything in between. All the heinous crimes that we do, all these things that we're performing, it amounts to nothing. Like they say, it's literally zero when Krishna isn't involved in the equation. There's nothing happening here whatsoever. So, killing his kinsman in the battlefield, as it describes later in the Bhagavad-Gita, killing someone's body essentially amounts to very little, because you can't actually kill someone. You can't actually kill their spirit soul. It's forever existing. All these considerations by Arjuna definitely prove that he was not only a great devotee of the Lord, but that he was also highly enlightened and in complete control over his mind and senses. So I don't know if necessarily, the point that he's willing to beg, willing to not fight, and having these considerations about killing his kinsman necessarily make him and prove that he's a great devotee. I think the fact that he is, as we discussed, open to hearing from Krishna, having Krishna as his best friend, and willing to confide in him and show that he is not sure of his decisions in this particular situation, as we are not ever sure of our decisions. Should we do this? Should we do that? What is the right path? If I do this, then, my wife will suffer. If I do that, my children might suffer like this. I might suffer. All these things to balance. And here he's saying, yes, I have these issues, as we all do with the mind. But what does he do? He surrenders to Krishna. He is asking Krishna, well, what do I do? I have all of these thoughts and processes in my mind, but what do you think I should do here? I don't understand why you're asking me to fight. Interesting thing is, Arjun does end up fighting against all of his best thoughts here, after everything's explained to him as well. So he didn't necessarily get, as you can see at the outset, he really didn't want to fight. So he didn't end up with the result that he wanted. So we don't get to sit there and speak with God. And, we do this a lot to try to manipulate people. We'll present things in a certain way, or, show weakness or sadness and pull on the heartstrings of someone to say, oh, no, it's okay. You can do it if you really want to. And, whatever. Like, there's so many manipulations that we use like that in order to get someone to do what we want, even though it's not the best case scenario, and even though the other person knows it's not the best case scenario. But because of emotion, people will cave in. Krishna does not cave in from Arjun's emotion here. No, he straightens his emotions out, straightens his intelligence out with all of this transcendental knowledge. So when we come to spiritual practices, we come to Krishna consciousness, and we present Krishna problems and surrender to him, and then experience whatever outcome, as he can change our karmas, actually. So you will experience something different than you may have just strictly karmically. And you think, oh, well, that's much better, isn't it? Not necessarily. So when you surrender to Krishna, he then has control over you, as he already does, but he's able to take personal control. And you never know what that's going to be. In order for you to be Krishna conscious, and since the body is really worth nothing, he might paralyze you because you might be too puffed up, or, you might have too much lust or desire or something. He might change your body so other people don't find you attractive. Some injury might happen to keep you here or there, so you're not too materially active. And we'll look at this, and again, a lot of people will have these things happen to them, and then they will get angry at Krishna and leave Krishna consciousness as well. And that's an interesting point too, is we have freedom of choice. We have our freedom of desire. Krishna does not interfere with that, because if he did, he could just force us all to love him as he wants. That's not how things happen. We have our choice. So if we surrender unto him and something happens that we don't like, and we make the decision to turn our face back away from Krishna due to that circumstance, even though he was trying to help us, he doesn't interfere with that. So you'd think that, everything that God does is good. And on an ultimate scale, it is. But he does not know precisely how we will react to things. Just as he does not know precisely how his illusory energy will set up particular pastimes, his internal potency is even able to surprise Krishna a lot of the time at how his pastimes will play out. So he is not fully in control of everything, in the sense that he allows his energies to operate separately from him, which is a beautiful example there with the internal potency. So again, where his external potency not as powerful. However, each jiva does have its freedom of choice, and we do get to choose at different times to be Krishna conscious, to not be Krishna conscious, and to see his hand in our lives and choose often more than not to push it away as well. So Prabhupada continues here. His desire to live by begging, although he was born in the royal household, is another sign of detachment. So he's happy. This is something I experience a lot as well in my life, as I have business and I make more money. I've lived in circumstances for so much of my life with nothing. I grew up poor. I was even more poor after. I spent many years traveling and, doing books and Harinam and living in the ashram in Iskon Vrindavan in a tiny room with no bed, little trunk full of clothing, oftentimes not a penny to my name, no idea how I'll even leave, no flight tickets sometimes anywhere. So when you learn to live in that situation, literally begging, having no idea where your next, meal will come from, if you'll have any money, no means of purchasing a new jacket or having a nice bed to sleep in. And surprisingly enough, I'm not going to lie, I mean, you're able to be far happier in those circumstances. And that's why, as you go through your life and, if you progress through grihasta life, which most of us do, and get entangled in all of the material nonsense and all of the different things and having to weigh everything up, in that circumstance, I don't have a lot of time to dedicate to my Krishna consciousness. I don't have as much time as I'd like to work on mridanga and perfect my mantras and present all of my videos the way that I want and to go through and make Bhagavad-Gita classes and things. I don't have that presence of mind anymore that I did. So, the mind is the most important thing in terms of whether you're happy or sad. You can have everything in the world, but if the mind is disturbed, then you're unhappy. Like none of these things make you happy. So everything starts from up here. And when you're able to fully engage in your Krishna consciousness and live this simple life, just as a sannyas would, it's the best platform to be the happiest, in my opinion. And that's why taking sannyas is such a boon, because you're able to come back to that position. Although, as we spoke in the last class, so many sannyasis get stuck in the same situation, especially with having wealth and money. They're not placing themselves in that begging position. And I don't see how they can make much progress, because you're too weighed down by dealing with money, too weighed down by dealing with all these different things. So being very simple, very peaceful, having little money, little things to worry about, it just gives you so much more time to mentally focus on the things that you want to. Unfortunately for me and for many other people, living that way, it affects the body in a lot of different circumstances. The body will start to diminish in strength. You'll possibly have pains and problems. You're not eating properly. You're not working out. You're not keeping your body healthy. You're sitting too long, different things. But, that's again something that we're placing upon ourselves, this austerity that you have to come to a point in your spiritual practice where you're able to witness and experience the pains in the material physical body and still maintain that happiness, knowing that you want to focus your mind more on Krishna consciousness. Now, there is the practice, as we'll read later on in Bhagavad-Gita, of Ashtanga Yoga. A lot of yogis were meditating on the Paramatma for long periods of time, and they would have their little deerskin mat, and they would perform all of these asanas that we're familiar with, sun salutations, etc., to maintain the body. Now, that is a beautiful practice and something that clearly would work, but not many of us, especially sannyasis, are doing that or taking their health seriously, and a lot of them end up with health issues as well. So when you really look at the total scope of things, it is very, very difficult to weigh up and manage all of these different ashrams and all of these different circumstances, and to try to be fully Krishna conscious and maintain the body at the same time. Very, very difficult. So here it's saying Arjuna is so advanced and such a transcendentalist that whether he's living in opulence as a Kshatriya and fighting and having name and fame, or whether he even loses the battle and becomes a beggar, he is happy in either circumstance. And that's what we call dhira. Being dhira is very important in spiritual practice, being able to maintain equilibrium and not allowing our mind to get too happy or too sad no matter what's happening, just very even. And that's, another form of detachment as well. When you're detached, you're not getting pulled too high, you're not getting pulled too low. So here we're saying, he was truly virtuous as these qualities combined with his faith in the words of instructions of Sri Krishna, his spiritual master, indicate. What do we mean? Oh yeah, so his desire to live by begging is a sign of detachment. He was truly virtuous as these qualities combined with his faith in the words of instruction of Sri Krishna indicate. There's actually, as these qualities, oh yeah. So these qualities and his faith in Krishna, which is the most important part, indicate that he is very detached, very virtuous. He is willing to accept whatever outcome, So this is exactly what I was saying. He's surrendering unto Krishna, his spiritual master, and he's detached and virtuous enough that whatever Krishna, makes him do, and the two outcomes are very different. One could be seen as very good, one could be seen as very bad. Although in this circumstance, kind of both situations aren't very palatable. But ultimately, he is willing to surrender and be happy in either of those circumstances. And that's a quality that we as devotees really need to take on, Having that situation makes you very eligible for liberation, as it states. Unless the senses are controlled, there is no chance of elevation to the platform of knowledge. And without knowledge and devotion, there is no chance of liberation. So let's unpack this. Unless the senses are controlled, there is no chance of elevation to the platform of knowledge. So yes, as we said, there's a balance between the intelligence and the senses. So as the senses and the mind are more engaged, the intelligence is controlled by the mind. You must allow the intelligence to sharpen so eventually it can control the mind. So as long as the senses are uncontrolled, the intelligence is very weak and there's no chance of elevating to the platform of knowledge. Very simple statement. Now, without knowledge and the intelligence being sharpened and devotion, so you need intelligence and devotion to Krishna, there's no chance of liberation. So you must sharpen the intelligence and read Shastra and chant Hare Krishna, chant your 16 rounds every day to sharpen your intelligence in order to conquer over some of the senses and some of the mind, some of the time, at least at the start. Now, once that starts, and that could happen in many people that aren't even Krishna conscious, but you have to add in your devotion and surrender to Krishna on top of having your intelligence now, because you can become a very dry, speculative person that is, what's the word I'm looking for? An impersonalist, not really adding Krishna into the mix of Shastra as so many do. So you can be a very strong advocate for Shastra, for intelligence, for impersonalism, But you're not adding the devotion. The devotion is what makes you a bhakti yogi. You have strength and intelligence and devotion through chanting Hare Krishna, devotion through preaching, devotion through serving your deity and making prasadam, devotion through kirtan, especially kirtan. The most important thing is kirtan, congregational chanting. And the most important thing about congregational chanting, I really want to discuss this a little bit, although the class is getting longer. When I used to chant in ISKCON Vrindavan, I used to do the night shift, 1:30 to 4:30 in the morning. I did like 18 months of that. And, depending on who came onto that shift, especially the night shift, even the 10 to 1 shift as well, anything out of the public eye, anything with, less people, less noise, with, 5 mridangas and 6 cartels and all this noise kind of drowning things out. More of a performance sometimes. It's very easy to mask a lack of devotion to the holy name. It's very easy to mask a lack of ruchi and taste for the holy name in those circumstances, very rajagun circumstances. Now you take someone and put them in, an empty temple at 2 a.m. and ask them to chant Hare Krishna for 1 hour to 1.5 hours straight, nonstop. And it's just you and them, 2 people usually. Sometimes there's 3, but even with 2. A lot of the people are, some of them are, devotees that have been in the movement for a long time. Some of them have had positions or, run temples or think that they're somebody or whatever. But the thing that I realize is that it doesn't matter who you are, what position you hold in the material world and ISKCON. When you sit down in that circumstance, you can tell immediately who they are, if they have any taste for the holy name, if they have any real ruchi. And so many people suffer like anything in those circumstances because they don't really have a taste for Krishna consciousness yet. And that's also what that ashram provides, is this ability to take people and literally break them down and make them chant Hare Krishna in these awkward circumstances endlessly for 6 hours every single day. And it's quite the difficulty for some people. Some people thrive and love it and enjoy it, and some people endure untold amounts of mental and physical stress trying to perform that service. So I really realized after so many nights of that with different people, you can see who really enjoys spending time with Krishna and who doesn't. And it doesn't matter what position they hold in ISKCON. It's immediately revealed, who has taste for the holy name or not, irrespective of, what they hold as a position or who they are, what they're trying to present as their image to people, or all these different things. But when they really chant down, they chant Hare Krishna, like you can instantly tell if they have Shakti or not. So that is, and if you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, especially Chaitanya Bhagavat, Chaitanya Bhagavat does not speak much about really the concept of preaching. Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya there's not a lot of preaching happening per se. Many people, when they see him, are immediately captivated by him and joining in. In some circumstances, people are a little bit, negative towards him, and there's definitely past times like that. But generally, it's a positive experience because he's so pure. He's immediately attracting most people to the Harinam or Sankirtan. But most of the chanting is happening for a lot of the pastimes behind closed doors. In fact, without any non-devotees in there whatsoever. And if there is a non-devotee, it really affects the quality of the chanting as well. And, Lord Chaitanya would detect this and kick them out. because the ecstasy stops. Everyone involved in kirtan has to be very devotional, has to be very switched on, has to be willing to follow the tunes, the patterns, to chant wholesomely and with full heart and full vigor. And the other people involved have to know how to play the instruments, or if they don't, have to be pure in their intent to play and actually try to offer something to Krishna. The people have to respond correctly and chant wholeheartedly as well. That's something that rarely, if ever, outside of ISKCON Vrindavan happens, to get a group of people from, ISKCON temples to sit down in a smaller environment or a home program, or even on Harinam to chant like that. I rarely, if ever, see it. So few people have ever had the opportunity to chant in those circumstances in ISKCON in the middle of the night and form that taste for the holy name, that they don't understand even what real kirtan means. When you're able to chant by yourself in the middle of the night and experience ecstasy and ruchi and not fall asleep and really relish the holy name, when you then take that to a public forum, it's so much more potent because that taste is only elevated by people's greater ecstasies, by people being more energetic during the day, by having more Rajagun, kind of presenting your pure, blissful chanting to the public that it's so relishable, and the other devotees as well chanting have to not be egotistical and envious of that too. And there's a lot of envy in ISKCON and a lot of envy amongst players and singers. That all inhibits the ability to chant. I rarely even like to chant anywhere, including in ISKCON, especially during the day, because there's so much envy. The moment you try to chant, everything's brought down by all of this envy that people are experiencing. People aren't generally transcendental enough to, as in Lord Chaitanya's situation, chant behind closed doors all night and just experience this pure bliss of the holy name. That's why people that aren't on that level were removed in Chaitanya Bhagavat. So, congregational chanting, Harinam means that we're chanting the holy name. We're chanting Hare Krishna. We are given this a great ability to associate with God directly through his holy name. Harinam does not mean going out and sitting on the street in a very unprofessional way, aggressively and very poorly presenting the holy name to people with no lack of real musicality, with no true devotion, with ulterior motives, trying to get benefit from the holy name. By using Harinam rather than just presenting Harinam as it is, presenting the holy name fully decorated with this wreath of beautiful devotion that we have. And I've spent a lot of time on the streets too. And, you can set up a program like that. And, the New York Harinam as well has been very successful with this, of presenting the holy name in a way that people find it palatable, that actually makes devotees. And the only way that you do that is to having people as well chanting every day for long periods of time together to break down these barriers. You can't be envious of someone for years and years and years, at 6 hours a day. Eventually the mind just breaks and you give up. So, we have to do a lot of chanting, but, Harinam has become this concept that we have to go out and preach to people, that we have to just go out and forcibly cram the holy name down their throat, even when we don't even have taste for it, really. And presenting it in a way that isn't palatable, not working on our skills, not being open and fluid in the circumstances, to catering to each particular person. Again, when you're on the street and you're just doing one thing in kind of an aggressive way and chanting Harinam and fanatically not addressing the needs of each particular person that comes into the Harinam. Every person needs something different, needs a different mood. You need to cater specifically to that person if you want to catch them and capture them in that moment. So when you're not doing that and you're rigorously adhering to the idea that we must preach, we must constantly chant the holy name, you're not actually serving Krishna in that circumstance, because you must be willing to stop the chanting or have people on hand that can directly address each person's needs and explain to them what they want and preach and have a whole circumstance there to bring them into something. So I find a lot of fanaticism falls into this, where we think that Harinam is one thing, but it really isn't. Harinam means that we have the holy name to chant, and that is our means of liberation, our means of getting out of samsara. The holy name is everything. It doesn't have to be chanted in a particular way. It doesn't have to be chanted on the street all the time. In fact, the street is really the last place that we should ever be going and doing Harinam, in my opinion, with the present state of ISKCON, when we can't even sit down together and have a proper kirtan of any level of ecstasy. It's very difficult. 90% of the people here that we do kirtan with, I sit down and chant with them if it's a smaller group, and I end up just chanting myself because they can't even chant and play mridanga. Like it's ridiculous how little people know to chant. You sit down with most of the congregational people in smaller settings, you try to get them to chant, they can't. They don't know how to even sing the tunes or chant Hare Krishna. They have no devotion to the holy name in that way. They can chant and mutter a little bit in, a setting of 300 people with a bunch of noise. But taking people and putting them in small settings and getting them to really, from the heart, like follow a tune with someone who's really chanting, I mean, there's very few people. So that is what you have to focus. You got to chant your 16 rounds to start. You've got to read your Shastra, and you have to learn how to do some kirtan. You have to. At least to some extent. You have to have some people that can play nice cartels, like properly understand patterns and time signatures. You have to have one person that can play the mridanga at least, 5 or 6 beats that are pure and shastric and beautiful, even if they're super simple, but at least they're presented nicely. All of them need to be able to chant nicely and follow the tunes. You have to learn a bunch of tunes. Then you need someone that can play harmonium or cartels and sing nicely. All 3 of you, or 2 at least, need to be able to do all of those things and chant from the heart. And you need to be able to do them behind closed doors without anyone watching, without any prestige or anything like that, and be able to feel ecstasy during those kirtans. And then, and only then, should you start preaching to your own congregation and bringing more people into that fold and starting to form a group that can chant with that level of purity. And if that point ever happens, then push those people out onto the street and develop a proper preaching program. You don't just go out onto the street and, chant Hare Krishna publicly and think that you're going to go back to Godhead. I know, and a lot of people have preached this, and, I've changed my stance on so many things now, especially as I've really read and studied this scripture. And you just realize that there's so many situations in ISKCON that a lot of stuff's just thrown at you and you're told all of this fanatical stuff, which isn't necessarily true. You have to really sift through what is the exact thing that we should be doing versus what has become a social norm in ISKCON. And I feel like this concept of just socially going out and doing Harinam is at this point extremely inappropriate. for many different reasons. And the main reason too is I don't even like to really preach to people at the moment, outside of, what I'm doing here, but to really go out into the public and to take someone and change their life immediately, which you can do, believe me, and we've done it on the street. If you do it properly, you really can pull a lot of people into this, just as you saw Srila Prabhupada's movement bring thousands and thousands of people. It can be done. However, unless you really have something to offer, and Prabhupada did, he offered those people so much, such an immense, structure, and so much money was coming in, so many temples, so many people were living in much better circumstances. Now, all you hear is these devotees living in horrible circumstances, in horrible conditions, with no money, with no care, with so much neglect. There are no brahmacharya ashrams. There's no concept of preaching, really. So why are we going out on Harinam and telling people to become Krishna conscious when we have nothing to offer them? And even when you become Krishna conscious, I mean, if you're really honest with yourself, being Krishna conscious is one of the hardest things that you're ever going to do. Like, you're now, your entire life, every waking second that you breathe and live now, you're aware of the mind, of the senses, of the reality, of the falseness, of all of the horrible things that you think about that you want to do. Every time you do something bad, you feel distressed about it. And that distress is something that you never used to feel, lamenting about doing bad things. That is a sign of progress in Krishna consciousness, in fact. However, you have to deal with this. It's a heavy, heavy burden moving through Krishna consciousness like this. And it's a burden that ISKCON is not bearing any weight of it on its shoulders anymore. ISKCON is not there for you. So, another reason why you see these Harinams failing is because, as I've explained, the pure chanting, the inability to actually chant behind closed doors with people, to actually bring something to them on the street. But even if you do make a devotee, even momentarily, there's no structure to deal with them. So I almost feel, until I understand more about my Krishna consciousness, until I really understand more about how to get past some of the material roadblocks of it, I don't want to preach to people and tell them, hey, come and do what I'm doing, and maybe that's a symptom of just feeling lower and lower, and then you're not able to preach to people. I don't know, but yes, my life has improved a lot, and I'm very happy that I came to Krishna consciousness, but it is such a burden that it's almost difficult to preach and say to other people to try it with the state of ISKCON. And I'm not even really a part of ISKCON anymore, and so many people I know have left ISKCON as well. So yeah, I just wanted to speak about that a little bit, about Harinam these days. And so unless the senses are controlled, there is no chance of elevation to the platform of knowledge. So we just discussed this. Without knowledge and devotion, yes, Arjun was competent in all these attributes over and above his enormous, what's this word here? Arjun was competent in all these attributes over and above his enormous attributes in his material relationships. Arjun was competent in all these attributes that we've spoken, yes, okay, over and above his enormous attributes in his material relationships. I don't really understand that sentence. Maybe I'm missing something there. I don't know why the word enormous attributes is being used. I don't really understand that. Material relationships. But basically, Arjun does have the intelligence, does have the knowledge, does have surrender to Krishna. And And even though he has all of these attributes of, being very connected to his material relationships as well, he's able to take, as we've said, take the mind, take the devotion, control the senses, control his dedication to his material relationships, and move forward and surrender to Krishna. So that is text 6 and what I have to say about that. We will look at text 7 soon. Okay, Hare Krishna.